So welcome everybody on the next Open Virtualization Professionals webinar. Let's just give briefly 30 seconds to 1 minute just to double check if everything works fine. So just let us know on a chat that you're hearing us and sees us properly. There should be two of us, me and Alexey. Alexey, hello.
Hello, nice to meet you all.
Okay, great. So let's just double check that everything works fine from the audience. Just give me a comment that you're hearing us without any interruption. Everything works good. Great. Alexey, you are the new guest, so you've never been in the Open Virtualization Pro community. So just briefly, if you could introduce yourself before we will go a deep dive and talk about the technology that your company presented on.
Well, my name is Alexey Palazhchenko. I'm currently live in Armenia. I'm co-founder and CTO on FerretDB Inc., which is an American company and creator and original author of FerretDB.
Great.
I am a Go developer. I did some organized some conference in the past, did some podcasts in the past. These days, don't have time for all that. FerretDB takes all my time.
So it's not good that you don't have a time, yeah. But I know how it is, especially when you're developing. So you're connecting these two worlds. So the code will not do it by its own, even if we have a chatbot GPT. Yes.
Well, GitHub Copilot actually helps quite a lot.
You see.
Yeah.
So Alexey, first question, because you said you're one of the founders, FerretDB. What the Ferret stands for? Yeah, to be honest, I always heard this name when I spoke with Marcin Wusia and never understand the naming. So I think you are one of the best person who I can ask this question.
So originally, both the company and the product was called MongoDB, kind of a replacement for MongoDB is MongoDB. But that, of course, was a bit too close for breaking a trademark for MongoDB, and we decided to change the name. We had a spreadsheet of maybe 100 variants, and we voted for each of them, and it just happened that FerretDB is the one that got all 3 votes from 3 co-founders. It doesn't really mean anything, but after the fact, we decided, okay, actually what it means that there's idiom called ferret out, which is about searching something and trying to find something. And we decided, yeah, well, that actually fits the database quite nicely.
Okay. So that's right. So this is the story behind. So definitely, so first thing when I hear about read about the FerretDB, you're saying you are the alternative, of the Mongo, or alternative usage of the Mongo. So let's go deep dive and understand what's behind the scenes, behind the concept, and what's actually the advantage for the open source community. So if you could share the presentation and feel free to start a discussion around this topic.
Okay, let's go. So my talk today is called FerretDB building an open source MongoDB-compatible database on top of PostgreSQL. So FerretDB is not an alternative way to use MongoDB. That's a replacement for MongoDB. But before we talk about, okay, why we want to replace MongoDB, let's talk maybe a bit what is MongoDB and why it's good and why it needs to be replaced. So the title of the talk is quite helpful for me because it basically gives us a plan of the talk. We talk about MongoDB first, then we talk about open source and licensing, that we are going to talk about how we build it. And then in the end, a few technical details about how we use PostgreSQL for that.
This is funny. You show the agenda with this number, so
yep.
I didn't recognize at the first. So nice,
very easy.
Yeah, very easy.
Yeah. So MongoDB. What's good about MongoDB? Why it's so popular? So first of all, they provide great developer experience. If you used any database before MongoDB becomes a mainstream, you probably use some ORMs, which you have objects in your code, and then you have tables in database, and you have feed objects into database, maybe into several databases, uses joins, and that wasn't really easy. right? It would be nice if you just have an object and shove it into the database, and then you read it back and get the same object. So that's essentially what MongoDB does. They do it through good drivers that allow you to do just that. They are the Apache 2.0 permissive license. They don't affect license of your software in any way. And they basically provide you an interface. You just connect, store object in the database, get it back, and that's easy. And then they had a great community back in the day. So interesting story, very, very many years ago, they had this competition basically where you have to write a blog post about how you open source projects that you build uses MongoDB. And back in the day, I was a contributor on the open source project called Greylog, which is not open source anymore, but back in the day it was open source. And I actually won iPad, and MongoDB company, back then it was 10 Gen, they sent me iPad. So great community building. Of course, these days it's not so great. So let's talk about the bad parts. So MongoDB historically has a lot of problems with reliability and performance and scalability. And if you were around that time, you maybe remember this video. If don't, you can Google it. It's called MongoDB's Web Scale. It's a bit rough, but also very, very funny. And maybe the problem is that they just do too much because they have their own backend, their own storage layer, their own wire protocol, their own query language, their own data modeling, everything their own. And it was, back in the day, it was not so big company. And of course, it's very different today. It's a very big company. It's a publicly traded company, and we get all the information about the internal, about money, and we know that the company actually loses money still, despite being a public company and being in business for so many time. So how are they going to make money if MongoDB is free? Well, first of all, they built own software as a service solution called Atlas, and they basically went all in on Atlas, and many features have been added only to Atlas version and not to the MongoDB itself. But then you basically change the license and make it impossible to use MongoDB as open source solution. It's no longer open source. So let's talk about license a bit, but before that, I have to do a standard disclaimer. What you see here is what I'm going to talk about. It's not legal advice. You should not trust strangers on the internet with legal advice.
Never.
Of course, we consulted with them, but that doesn't mean that I could say what they say. That would be legal advice. So before that, MongoDB was licensed under a license called AGPL version 3, which is a popular open source license. It has the difference between SSPL, which is the current license, and AGPL is basically in one section. And I'm going to describe that section in AGPL and SSPL and compare them. So in the AGPL, it says like if you modify the program, and that's important trigger condition. So basically, if you don't modify a program at all, you don't have to comply the rest of the section. So for example, if you use something like Grafana, which is under AGPL, and don't modify it, you're basically unrestricted how you may use it for anyway. If you modify it, there are some conditions. So if you modify it, and then you should provide something to all users interacting with it remotely through a computer network. How interacting is defined is not defined. It's not a term in the license itself, but basically we can say, okay, if you could use the program over network, then do something. And then what is something? You basically have to share corresponding source code with any users of your program, everyone who interacts with it. And corresponding source code includes the source code of the program and scripts that control activities for deployment, building, and so on and so on. So what is scripts in this context is a bit tricky because there are no good legal precedent, no trial in states about AGPL. But common understanding, and that's what authors of the software license say, they say basically you can't just release the source code without build scripts. Make files, tasks files, whatever you use to build your software, it should be possible for users to modify your software and then build it themselves. You could not omit build scripts, for example. And they, I guess, speaking from experience. Okay, So what's changed in SSPL?
What I understood, Alexey, they the Mongo changed this HDPL into the version 3. So started with the full open source, building the community, etc. So when it happened, actually, these changes.
It was around slightly after MongoDB 5, so it was maybe 5.0.1 or .2. When was the time? A few years ago.
Yeah, 2 years ago. Okay.
Maybe more than 2 years ago, but not that far away. Yeah, so basically they captured the market with open source solution, and now they wanted to capture all the money on that market. They changed the license to SSPL. Again, the change is basically in one section, and now it reads, if you make functionality of the program available. So if you just provide it as a service, for example, then you should do something. It's not enough that you modify the source code. If you provide MongoDB unmodified, you still have to comply with the license. If you make it available to third parties as a service is defined very, very broadly. They have this phrase they like, includes without limitation, and there are a lot of things. And that's kind of one of the problems, and maybe one of the main problems, is that the definition is so broad that pretty much everyone could be considered a service by their definition. For example, let's say you have some CRM system, and CRM system stores information about customers, users, companies, whatever. And then they have a phrase called that, okay, so if you use MongoDB for something and then the primary purpose of your software is the same, then you should comply with this spell. But primary purpose of CRM system is to store data. Primary purpose of MongoDB is to store data. So one could argue that primary purpose of the database and your software is the same, and therefore you should comply with the spell. Again, there was no trial yet, so we will see how it goes, but maybe there now will be a trial, and I will explain in a second why. So what you should do to comply with the spell if it applies to you, if you use functionality of your program available to third parties. You should provide service source code, not corresponding service source code, but service source code. And service source code, again, includes without limitation everything, literally everything. So the text in the license itself kind of includes that, okay, you should open source your operating system kernel. You should open source your drivers, not open source license and SSPL and so on. And that's make it impossible to use MongoDB in many, many scenarios, because let's say I built a MongoDB service on top of Windows. I could not relicense Windows source code on this SSPL. I just don't have it. And if I have it, I will be in jail, because it's not illegal to have a Windows source code for someone who doesn't work at Microsoft for most cases. So there is no way to comply with the spell, in fact. And of course, MongoDB kind of understands the problem that if that would be clear for everyone, no one will actually use it. And they have a FAQ section on their website. They try to say, okay, that's not a problem. That's not about you. That's only about Amazon. If you don't provide a publicly available service like Amazon or Google or Microsoft, you're fine. The problem is that section is not a license text. So legal text makes precedent all the time. What they describe in their website, it's basically a marketing attempt to downplay the problems of the license itself. And yeah, as I said, you don't have to trust me. After all, that's legal advice over the internet. So I could give you one more. The open source initiative, that's a company which basically defines what open source is. And they are stewards of an open source. They provide, define what licenses are considered open source or not. They have this nice web page where they just say SSPL is not open source.
Yeah, I just read that the server-side public license, so this SSPL 1.0 was published in 16th of October 2018. So actually 5 years, and it was published by the Mongo. So when the Mongo was they introduced this kind of the license as the first company worldwide. Yeah.
And now a few other software packages use that license. It's not popular And yeah, hopefully it will never be that popular for that problems. But yeah, a few of them, including Greylock, I mentioned before, that was open source project under Apache license, I believe. Now it is under SSPL2. Yeah, so here's the problem, but actually that's not the end of the problem. So they have this protocol specification, which is in their documentation, and documentation is licensed under the common license called Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share Alike, which basically means you can share it unmodified and could not use the documentation for commercial purposes. And what that means in the license text is actually means that you could not copy this documentation or modify it and then use it in your product. But let's say we build a MongoDB-compatible database. If the license text would be different, we could just get the documentation, apply it to FerretDB, and then publish as FerretDB documentation. The license text doesn't allow that. But in that commit, which is on GitHub, they say, okay, you are not allowed to adopt this material for commercial purposes, such as to create the commercial database or database service offering. So basically, they are trying to say that this license doesn't allow you to read the documentation if you are building a MongoDB alternative. But that's not the case. That's not what the license means itself. So that particular commit in the documentation, what actually triggered me to start working on alternative to MongoDB, because that's just lie. They just lie to us. They just try to induce fear and uncertainty into MongoDB users. Okay, what other alternatives do we have to MongoDB? If that's such a great idea that maybe someone already built something for that. So there is Amazon DocumentDB, which is a great solution if you're on AWS, it's not open source. There is a Cosmos DB, which is a great alternative if you use Azure, it's not open source, you can install it too. There is something called Oracle Database API for MongoDB. I don't know much about it, except that Logo is better than previous two, in my opinion, at least it's fun. There is Informix. I have no idea, but they provide some MongoDB compatibility. And there is something called MariaDB MaxScale, which is source available product. You can see the source code, you could use it. Unfortunately, it's also not open source. It's licensed under BSL, which is business source license, which forbids you for using it in production. So what we want to do? We wanted to do a MongoDB-compatible database that should work unmodified with MongoDB drivers and applications. So if you have some applications that uses MongoDB already, you basically swap MongoDB with FerretDB and everything will work as is unmodified.
Okay, so as I correctly understand, the goal is to fully, transparently, and really fast, exchange, just, be proposed as a Mongo for the drivers and apps without any changes. So you put in the Postgres with a Ferret on top of it, and the rest is thinking that they speak with the Mongo itself.
Yeah, that's the goal. That's the goal. We are going to talk about PostgreSQL and storage in a bit, but the general idea, you replace MongoDB with FerretDB and nothing else changes.
Okay.
Except the license, of course, because FerretDB is a better license. Yes. So we don't want to build our own storage layer. So that's because they are saying that any database is reliable enough once it's 12 years in production. And we did not want to do the same as MongoDB trying to build everything. We use MongoDB drivers, we use MongoDB query language, we use MongoDB wire protocol, and then we use PostgreSQL in storage in case of FerretDB. And PostgreSQL is old, reliable database, so we don't have to think too much about reliability and performance to some degree, and that FerretDB users will lose data and so on. So we don't want to build our own storage layer, at least for now. Who knows how it will change, but that's the plan. And we wanted to be honest open source solution. So no SSPL, no business source license, nothing like that. So the current license is Apache 2.0, which is permissive license. So I keep saying like we, our idea, and so on, but who are we? Who are you? So that's Peter Zaitsev, who is co-founder and CEO of Percona until recently. he recently stepped down to become an advisor and co-founder, and he is also advisor in FerretDB. That's Peter Farkas, who is also ex-Perconian, and he is the CEO of FerretDB. And at Percona, he worked on leading support teams and some other team, services team. And me, I also worked at Percona. I was team lead and backend architect for Percona Monitoring and Management project, which is a solution for monitoring databases. But before that, I was working on different jobs, mostly as senior developer, team leader, and so on and so on. So all former free Perconians decided to build a FerretDB. So what is FerretDB? FerretDB is a stateless proxy for MongoDB wire protocol. It accepts connections from MongoDB client and modifiers, converts them to SQL queries, and sends them to backend. Currently, our main backend is PostgreSQL, and we store data in PostgreSQL. We also support some other alternative backends. So right now, we are working hard on SQLite backend prototype. And then next week on Percona Live, we plan to announce it. But if you see it now, then you have a small teaser. And basically, yeah, there are some use cases where you don't have to run the PostgreSQL as separate database, but you don't have a lot of data, and you could use SQLite as embedded database. No separate process, no other problems related to running a big real database side by side with FerretDB. We also have support for Tigris backend, which is another alternative solution, alternative to PostgreSQL. It's custom backend built on top of FoundationDB. Okay, and FerretDB is under Apache 2.0 license. As I said, it's a permissive open source license. So we launched it 1.5 years ago in December of 2021. Actually, we launched it as MongoDB in November, and in 1 month, we saw so many great feedback, so many people were excited about MongoDB that we decided, okay, it makes sense to do it. We left our jobs and launched it officially FerretDB under the new name and as a company in December of 2021.
So still in a COVID, too much time. So you started to dig in and writing the code.
Kind of, yeah. But you know that all of us actually have a lot of experience working remotely even before COVID. So in some sense, COVID did not change much for us. Except that our family was with us most of the time. But for
question
us,
is why you all of you work as in a Percona. So what, let's say, trigger you to go into this direction? So like community, speaking with the people, or it's your own idea? So I'm just curious behind the scene what you pushed and trigger you to make this kind of the investment, because we know it's not so easy to starting from the scratch.
Okay, so the thing is that both Peter Farkas and me, we left Percona to other companies. And then we left those other companies to found FerretDB. So we did not left Percona to build FerretDB. We just happened to work with the same company. And actually, I did not work with Peter Farkas at the same time at Percona. So he left well before I joined. And personally, I left Percona because I just wanted to try something new. And between FerretDB and Percona, I worked on operating system written in Go called Talos OS by Sidera Labs. And that was a great, fun project that still exists. The company is still doing strong. But then I decided to go back to database space simply to build my own company. That was like trigger for me. I know that I could make a difference here. It was interesting. And of course, it's always much more interesting to build your own company than work for someone else, even as great company as Talos was and still is. I guess the same. I would not...
I know what I'm, when I, for example, entered the backup and recovery 9 years ago, and so lots of people said, you're crazy because there is no space for, for the small players. So I'm, it's a bold decision that you make in this statement and saying, okay, there is a space for us as a FerretDB, and there is a space for the real open source alternative based on the Mongo. So so that's why I'm asking, because everybody is clapping their hands, but after a while, when you're starting to doing the tough job, building the software, they're saying, this is what I had. We're waiting for the next release, then we will consider it. So this I know it's the first years can be painful, but I just want to ask, if after 1.5 year, you are 100% sure that this is the right direction, and it's still need for this kind of the alternative way for the MongoDB itself.
So we launched 1.0 last month, and we get so many great feedback, so many users, so many potential customers, so many partners, so many new contributors that we are sure that that still makes sense to do. In general, I would say, so MongoDB created a market for document databases, but now they want to own the whole market. And what we want to do, we want to make the market bigger. So there are some alternative open source, not open source, cloud solutions, not cloud solutions. We want to market to become big itself. And then we are fine with having a small piece of that market, I would say, because we don't have that much money as MongoDB does need to pay salaries for hundreds and hundreds of people who work there. We're much smaller company right now, and we would be fine with having a not large piece of that market. But of course, we want to move the market forward, because once there's one dominant player on the market itself becomes stale. There are a lot of problems with MongoDB, and not only license problems, but also technical problems, performance problems, reliability problems. And without anyone to kick in them to move forward, they will not move forward. Why they would? They are fine, they own the market. So we strongly believe the markets would be better if there are many players on it.
For the market, we always, funny when you put 1.0. When we build our first version, we took the approach that we built 1.1 or 2.1. So not always showing the 0 in the second as a major number. It's always looking better. And just the funny story how we made the first version. So we decided, okay, let's do the 1.1 or 2.1. I guess we've never launched 1.0, even if it was 1.0. So respect.
Yeah, so we decided to bump the version number for multiple reasons. First of all, we are now sure that we are not going to break backward compatibility until the next major version. So until 2.0, we would work with data on PostgreSQL, on disk, as they say. So we are going to improve performance, fix compatibility, fix bugs, and all that, but you don't have to do the full backup and restore for every update. Of course, you are still advised to do that just in case, but in theory, you could update FerretDB to a newer version until version 2.0 and it would be fine. It will be just better as it was before. So that's one reason. Another reason that FerretDB is actually quite useful. The performance is not so great, compatibility is still not so great, but there are already people who are fine with what FerretDB provides already. They already use it in production. And they use it in production because they could not use MongoDB for license reasons. For example, we launched it with Scaleway provides FerretDB as a service, as experimental. I think it's still not production ready, but it's available in beta. And then there's a Sivo marketplace where you could run FerretDB as a service. There are some users that run FerretDB on hardware that is officially not supported by MongoDB anymore because MongoDB bumped processor requirements some time ago, and now it just doesn't start on somewhat older but still relevant hardware, and FerretDB does support it, and so on. And of course, we support PostgreSQL, and if you already use PostgreSQL as backend, you don't want to support multiple storage backends. It will be easy for you to support just PostgreSQL. Yeah, so back to the presentation. Actually, I'm going to talk a bit about these topics too. So we launched it in April, and we got a lot of great feedback, a lot of users, customers, and we are now using to expand our adoption rate. So if you want to try it, please try it. That's like the best time to try it to report bugs for us. Let's talk about PostgreSQL. I'm not sure how much time it will take and how interesting is that. Please tell me if that's like too many, too deep details. So why PostgreSQL in general? It's a huge community and old open source project, very old, very reliable. A lot of bugs already fixed simply because there are so many users of it. It has good JSON support, which is important for us because we store all MongoDB JSON documents as JSON fields. And many companies, as I said, already run PostgreSQL and MongoDB side by side, and it would be easy for them if they just use one backend instead of two, because like they're very different from operational perspective. And if you can maintain only PostgreSQL, it's of course will be easy if you have to maintain both of them. So how we store data? As I said, MongoDB uses something called BSON, which stands for binary JSON. It's neither binary, neither JSON, but the name stuck. And order of fields in BSON documents is significant. So normally in JSON documents, the order is not significant. You can have AB or BA, and that would be the same document fields in that order. In BSON, that's important. For example, the first field of the document is a command you're going to run. And therefore, to understand what the command is, you have to understand which field is the first one. And for that, you have to understand the order of field. And then it's not preserved by JSONB column. So in PostgreSQL, there's data type called JSONB, which allows you to store JSON objects, and order is not preserved there. The fields are always sorted because it's easier for that way to search, to index them, and so on. And we store BSON documents in JSONB objects. How we do that? Well, that's easy. We just define additional schema on top of that JSON document. We store a list of fields and a special field of the object itself. And then here you can see that platform goes before application. That's because we just store that order in array. What else? So in BSON, there are more data types. There are 3 data types for numbers. JSON have just one, called number. In BSON, there's a double precision point number and then short and long integer. There is special type for timestamp, which is not time. They also have a separate data type for time. Timestamp is separate. They have a data type for JavaScript code with scope. I have no idea why someone wants to store JavaScript code with scope in the database. Luckily, it's now deprecated in MongoDB itself too. So how we support that? Well, the same way, we just extend our JSON object a bit to store information about data types. So we store the value itself as JSON number always, and that allows us to do effective searches, effective queries, effective indexes. But additionally, on top of that, we store information about original data type that's still useful in many, many cases. How we compare values? So we should compare values for filtering and for sorting. And what's interesting that in BSON documents, you can have separate different types for the same field name in 2 different objects. So in one collection, you can have documents where field foo have a string value, and the second document in the same collection stores integer in that field. That's not typically how you store information in relationship database like Postgres. So we have to compare those values somehow to sort them correctly and filter them correctly. And we also should do that for problematic values like nulls. So let's briefly check how it works out. For example, in MongoDB, if you compare not a number and 1, not a number is less than 1, which is obvious, of course, for them, I guess, because it's not obvious at all. I mean, we have no idea why they decided to do that, but anyway, like any order, any rule is better than no rule. It would be much worse if the ordering would be undefined, right? So that's always like that. Then null is less than not a number, which is obvious. Empty array is less than null. Empty array is less than array containing 1 element, null. So the question is, okay, so from those rules, we could kind of think that, okay, so empty array, if it's like 0 elements, that's less than any array with non-zero elements, and then it's less than null. How would you think null and array containing null compare to each other? Is it like less or more? The answer is it actually depends on the sorting order. So if you sort in one direction, null will be the first. If you sort in the other direction, null will be the first two. Which strange. And that, of course, reminds me of that old talk about JavaScript and how it's obvious. The same thing with MongoDB.
I've never saw the what mana.
I mean, that's the link is here. It's like very short 5-minute talk with a lot of fluff, completely. And that's the same.
Okay.
That's the same. I mean, it's completely crazy. So how we could do that? So originally, what we tried to do, we tried to cover all that in FerretDB code. We basically generated huge SQL queries that cover all the cases, all the data types, all the edge cases. And we sent that huge query to the database. And PostgreSQL was fine with queries like that. The performance was good. What wasn't fine, it wasn't possible to do that for us anymore because the code that generated those queries was so fragile. I mean, it wasn't possible to support it. It wasn't possible to extend it. We basically hit a limit. That was a bit more than 1 year ago. So we decided to change it. So what we decided to do, we decided to do all comparison in our Go code. And then for each request, for example, let's say you want to get data from collection, give me a document where ID is 42. What we do, we fetch all the data. And now you think, okay, that's crazy. That's not a real database. Why for every request getting document by ID, when you get one document, you fetch all the data? That can scale, that can work, that performance is horrible, that's not a real database, etc., etc., etc. You're completely right. And we do that because, again, as I said, a lot of edge cases with comparison and so on. So what we did, we built compatibility first. So we handled all those edge cases, or at least those of them it was possible. We added a lot of great integration tests, and I honestly think that our integration testing covers much more than MongoDB integration testing by now, because they don't seem to test all those edge cases. They seem to be thinking, okay, so no one actually uses that, and therefore we should not test it. The problem is that people actually rely on those edge cases quite a lot, as turned out, and then we have to be compatible. But there are some cases we could remove support for edge cases. Sometimes because we know that no one uses it. For example, MongoDB kind of somewhat allows documents with empty fields. You can insert a document with empty fields, but after that, you pretty much can't do anything with it because all operation on it would fail. Or, for example, you could insert a document with dot in the middle of the name, but then you could not do anything with it because dot is special syntax in MongoDB for accessing nesting fields. So they have a lot of things like that. But we decided, okay, we are a new product, we could do a bit better, and maybe we just remove all those edge cases. But we are a bit conservative here because, again, some people, surprisingly, a lot of people depend on them. So we could not remove all of them. It don't make sense for us. Sometimes we just don't understand how it works, and therefore we just don't implement it yet. So after that, we push down simple queries. So for example, if in my example, when we want to get a document where ID is 42, or in this example, the field value is 42, we could actually send the SQL query back to the PostgreSQL to get all the document by that. But in that case, you actually could get more documents than only expected, because I said data type is different. So in that case, the value in the JSON object will be 42 as a number. But then you can say, okay, I want to get all objects where IV is 42, but only as int 64, for example. And then on top of that query, we do additional filtering on FerretDB side to exclude all those documents with incompatible types. As I showed before, that's why we store information about data types. And query like that also allows us to build effective indexes. So essentially, if your query is simple enough so we could push it down, you could build an index for that field, and it will work effectively as in PostgreSQL. So I talked a bit about integration testing. So why I think that our integration tests are better than MongoDB. That's because we actually include MongoDB tests in our tests. So we run their tests, and we don't run them all yet, but we run more and more and more. We have our own set of compatibility tests where we basically what we do, we send the same query to both FerretDB and MongoDB and compare results. That allows us to build compatibility with MongoDB without actually reading MongoDB source code that we don't want to do because of the license. And then we test existing applications that use MongoDB. So MongoDB protocol is interesting because for many commands, they return a lot of information about a lot of different fields. For example, in handshake message, when you connect to MongoDB, you get like, 40 fields in the response. And some applications use some of them fields, some other applications use different fields, and we ensure that we are compatible with all of them by just returning the result as close as possible to MongoDB. And of course, we have real users who just come to FerretDB community and say, hey, I tried my application and such command, such argument doesn't work, and then we fix it for them. And speaking of community, so yeah, as I said, we launched 1.0, and we got a lot of community interest, a lot of feedback, a lot of contributors. One person who is listening to this talk right now is actually a contributor to FerretDB, and yeah, he started contributing after 1.0 release. We have a public roadmap. You can see all we do in public, all issues are public, on the source code is public. Of course, most of the discussions are public, and roadmap might be the most interesting for you. Source code on GitHub, please give us stars on GitHub, of course, very important. And try it. Just try it, run it on your workload, see if it works for you, see if it's not. If it's not, then create issues for us, say that, okay, tried that and it doesn't work correctly, or the performance is horrible or something. Of course, tell us if it works, because it's also interesting for us. And that's all. I'm ready to answer questions, but here are a few links on our website, our GitHub, and our Twitter and Mastodon accounts.
Yeah, you said that the first version was in April. So how many times during the year are you planning to do in updates, more or less? What's the plan?
So, yeah, currently so before that, we released a minor version every 2 weeks, a minor or patch version. We are not completely sure how that rate would be soon. So probably we are going to release a minor version about every month or so. And if they say need to do a patch release, we will do it faster, and then there would be a quick fix. We already have some ideas for version 2, how we could improve performance by breaking backward compatibility, by storing data in a bit different way. We're also working on improving performance by making our own custom PostgreSQL extensions. That's early work currently. So sometime in the future, we will do version 2 with greatly improved performance and compatibility. But that's that should not prevent you from using FerretDB now, because as I said, we are not going to break compatibility in the minor versions, and for the major versions, of course, you can use every backup tool for MongoDB to backup and restore. So we are compatible with tools like MongoImport, MongoExport, MongoDump, MongoRestore, and other solutions for backing up and storing MongoDB for quite some time already.
Best way to contact and collaborate is via GitHub, or do you have any other places where the community could reach you? What is
so we have quite a lot of places. Yeah, GitHub. We have community Slack chat. What else? We have calls every week, open office calls when everyone could join and talk about FerretDB. Yeah,
GitHub, Slack, and this.
GitHub for everything. Yeah, for source code, for discussions, for issues. Yeah, for links to other places. Yeah.
Great. So Alexey, thank you very much. We are actually about the time, because you planned for 45 minutes. It's 44, so you exactly know how to do it in a proper way. So keep fingers crossed, because we have 1.0. So you made it, you launched, and keep fingers crossed that for the many of the Mongo installation, you will be a real alternative. So great idea behind the scenes. So looking forward how the project will involve and expand in the next months and the years. And for all of us who are watching it, so you will find this material on our Open Virtualization Pro or the YouTube. So if you have any questions, feel free to leave the comment or contact FerretDB team in a way how Alexey told you. So you have a Slack, you have a GitHub. You can just watch the. I was on Twitter on a web page, so it's really to navigate to catch the team. So if you have any questions, suggestions, places to improve or stars, like Alexey said, so definitely help the young teams to expand, to grow. Great idea, great opportunity. So like I said, keep fingers crossed. And Alexey, really thank you for this webinar, for sharing with our audience all of the great knowledge. So we know right now what is the real open source alternative for the Mongo. We already learned was the different licenses stands for, as a PL, etc., and HPL version 3. So it was really informative. Anything else from you to sum up?
No, just try FerretDB. That's the main one.
Try it. Yeah, don't dare to test it,
and then tell us about your experience. Yeah,
great. So thank you for all of the audience. Have a good day and see you on the next Open Virtualization Pro webinars. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.